Farming today doesn't always feel the same way it used to. Then again, some of it feels all the same. Maybe it isn't so much the jobs that changed, but how they get done. Now that's a different story. Efficiencies are critical, which is why you need a lender who will find the right loan structure for a strong financial future. You need a lender to look out for your whole farm operation. Ag Country.
My name is Rob Froning. I'm VP Insurance and Customer Education at Ag Country Farm Credit Services. We're going to talk a little bit about the upcoming harvest and some of the post-harvest with some of the wheat areas as far as what those yields and the markets may be looking at when we get into those yields. So again, Rob Froning, I'm been with Ag Country for 17 years. I grew up in a small farm south of Fergus Falls, Minnesota, where my dad had a grain elevator that I grew up working at. Love spending the evenings 24-hour drying. It's interesting how far we've come these days with electronics and technology that we don't need to do that all the time anymore. So, again, we'll get started right away. Again, I'm going to kind of cover what are the reports telling us. Obviously, we had a report out on Monday that reduced the yield estimates for corn and soybeans specifically, and so that did catch the market's attention. We saw some movement on Monday, and then now we've kind of simmered down and moved on to new information. So we'll just go through what some of those reports are telling us. What should we be thinking, and what possible movements could this market bring us? So we're going to start off with corn. So I just have up here basically the last 3 years of our corn supply. This is the start of the supply and demand. Where does our corn come from in the last 3 years, starting with the 2020 crop and then the estimated 2022 crop that those numbers came out on Monday as well. But if we just start with our acres, we're seeing some swing in acres every single year from, 2 years ago at 90 million acres up to 93, back down to 88. And again, that's what's getting planted. Prevent plant obviously playing a part in that this year in the 2022 crop. Saw a reduction in acres. And we saw some of those acres also get reduced on Monday too, along with the yield. And that's part of what some of the surprises were. But with, the current yield at a 172 per acre, United States average yield is the expected yield. And that was lower than what was expected or where we were before, which ultimately is reducing our total production for the year. If you look at some of those, if you go down just to the bottom there, the production line, we're at 13.9 billion bushels is what the projection is right now. These numbers are in millions, so that's 13.9. So the smallest crop we've had in the last 3 years. Not by huge numbers, but still significantly down from where we've been in the past. When we add that to our what we ended up last year at ending stocks, we have our total supply for this year at 15.4, just about 15.5 billion. You can see again down about 800 million bushels from a year ago. Now, what we have, and we'll get into the demand side of this as well, but as our supply shrinks, it's not necessarily because of yield is definitely down, and so are our acres. And it's a combination of those two. Swing in acres to go a long ways with the yield. We aren't projecting a really bad yield. 172 across the U.S. is a pretty good yield. It's just not quite to the expectations that they'd had before. So it's a little bit light, and our total supply then ends up being a little bit lower. So when we have that supply, where does it go? Where does the demand? Where do we use these supplies for? Who's using it? So we look at the domestic, obviously locally. A good chunk of that is going to be ethanol. But you can see our demand has also slipped a little bit, but not too much. Still at the 12 billion bushels domestically we're going to use here in the U.S. So that's not anything that's exported. That's basically feed, food, and fuel being used here in the United States. And we add our exports of just a couple billion of exports. Now, the past few years, a lot of that has been going to China, and that has increased our exports compared to normal. We don't normally export a lot of corn. Our exports have gone up. So I said it for the first time today, China, right? So that's probably a question mark. We always never know what's going to happen with China going forward. Moving on to our ending stocks, just so people understand, ending stocks is what we have left in the bin. So we harvest the crop, we use what we use over the 12-month period. what's left over in the bin before the next harvest. So the current estimates is we're going to have about 1.2 billion bushels left in the bin or left in the bank after we utilize what we need for this year. And to go a step further, we compare that to what's left versus what we used. And so how much is still left in the, use an example of a gas tank. You got 8%, 8.5% left in the tank after we got where we needed to go if we went on a trip. And so that's kind of where this corn is. What do we have left? 8.5%. That stat alone doesn't mean a lot. And so we started looking at comparative to where we've been in the past and where we might go into the future. And so looking at that 8.5, that's the blue line on this chart. And so just to give you a kind of an idea of where that blue line is and what we've done in the past. So measured on the right, the blue line you can see here, the last 3 years, we kind of went up and back down. Well, I kind of have those green lines marked on this chart is that 8 to 12% is when the market just gets sensitive. And any little news makes it excited, and that's what makes it a more volatile market. And we've seen a volatile market. It doesn't take much to move. I jokingly say it working at Dad's grain elevator, sitting in the scale house, and my dad comes running through in a hurry, and he was all excited. I'm like, Dad, what's going on? He said, the markets went crazy today. He said, they went crazy today? He goes, yeah, they're absolutely crazy. I said, well, what happened? He said, corn is down a nickel. It was crazy because corn went down 5 cents. The next day, soybeans went down 10 cents, and he was in a panic about 10-cent movement on soybeans. That again back in the early 90s when we were talking $1.30, $1.40 corn, or $3, $4 soybeans. So percentage-wise, that was a big move relative to today. Heck, we don't even realize it went down 5 cents, right? It takes much more than that for us to get too excited. So everything's relative. But when you start getting into these tighter markets, that's where just some any interesting news out there may persuade or get the markets to go in or out. And so those are things that we need to keep. We're in that area right now. So I heard a speaker up here earlier this week, and he basically said, as a guy who researches the market, the good news is I can honestly tell you, I have no idea what's going to happen. It doesn't make any sense. If it's news or weather that says you should be going up, it goes down, or it should be going down, it goes up. We have no idea what this market is doing. It's so crazy. So I should encourage everybody who does have questions, raise your hand. I think we do have a mic in the back. So if somebody has questions, feel free to raise your hand and we'll get you a mic and we'll try to answer that question if we can. So that was the US number. So then the next thing, we're in a global market right now. Some are arguing that we're going to kind of be deglobalizing here in the near future. But right now, everybody matters in the world. And so it's a global market. So looking at some of those same numbers here, again, that blue line is how much is left in the bin when we're done. And so here you can see over the last 6 years or so, back to 2016, I think it is, we have continually decreased what's left over year after year. So what does that generally tell us is happening? We are using more every year than what we're actually producing. So when it comes from a market perspective, that's good. Supply and demand, right? The less leftover supply that we have based on the demand, the probably more expensive, they're higher, they're going to be willing to pay for that commodity. So generally speaking, we're moving in the right direction. I just told you that US was at 8.5%. What's this number look like? 26%. It's a much bigger bin, right? We're talking about the whole world. And it's a much bigger demand. 26% is what we have left over by the time we're projected to be done with the 2022 crop. Now, the other side of this, I said it once, I'll say it for the second time. China. There's a good chunk of these leftover bushels of corn in China. Does anybody here know how many bushels are in China? Good, because I don't either. If you figure it out, let me know. They have a number they report, but the vast majority don't think it's there. And so they feel this is probably an overstatement of what's really out there in the world for extra corn, and it's probably a little bit tighter than that. Tighter markets, more volatile markets. Volatility creates opportunity as well as risk. And you need to be able to manage both of those. So again, we're tighter than this looks for the world numbers because of the corn in China won't leave China either. They have it stockpiled for their own use and consumption in their own ways. But again, we don't really know what's there. I just put those two together just to kind of give you, it does flow fairly close. And so we're not the only one raising corn in the world, but it's interesting how you see what the leftovers, they mirror each other pretty close. Obviously, they got tight there in the 04 through 2010, and then that huge increase there, that's when China found millions and millions of bushels just hidden up in the mountains somewhere that I'm sure are there if you can find them. So that's where they kind of had that separation when they found those Chinese bushels. So this is where our corn. I told you that we don't really export a lot. So the blue is the amount of exported bushels, and the orange is what we use here locally in the United States that we process it here in the United States or feed use. So as you can see, the exports are fairly. Isn't necessarily flat, but it's about the same amount across that bar graph. With the exception, the last 3 years, we've seen a little bit of tick up, and that's the Chinese coming in and buying corn when they don't normally buy corn from the U.S. They needed it. They had to get some corn, so they came here. But wait, I said China 3 or 4 times now. They came to us when prices were going up to buy corn, but they have a bunch of supply. Makes sense, right? If they get a bunch in the bin, they should come buy ours when prices get high. That's, again, conspiracy theory why maybe those corn bushels aren't there. So what does this mean for the futures? This is how we get paid, right? This is just a snapshot. I took it last night before I went to bed. What are the futures saying? Roughly in the red square on the screen there is our December futures close yesterday. $6.82. Now at the local elevator, you don't get that. You have what they call basis. Positive or negative. Typically this area it's negative. So you're going to get cash based off of this number, some kind of a basis. Now, generally speaking, I know we have a widespread audience here, but a lot of times we can consider 40 to 60 under 40 cents to 60 cents under futures kind of a normal basis. Some areas further to the south and to the east, they may be closer to 25 as a normal basis. Prices right now are looking pretty good as far as the basis number. But more important to that, this tells me a timeline. We're nearing harvest. What is the market telling you? Joe Farmer, if you bring your corn to me in December, I'm going to pay you $6.82 minus my basis. If you want to put it in your bin and not sell it to me until July, I'll pay you $6.83 minus basis. Who wants to store corn in a bin for 7 months for a penny? I'll talk about it later, but interest rates are what? Going up. If you have money borrowed and you don't sell your corn, what are you paying on your loan? Interest. Can you afford to pay the interest that's going to accrue from now until July if you're going to get a penny a bushel more? I would argue probably not. I know a lot of setups and farmers have their setups to get through harvest and get through it in a hurry because we can't always rely on the elevator being open, having capacity, especially if we need to dry it ourselves, things like that. On-farm storage is great. There are years that will pay for itself very, very fast. Purely looking at this market, what is our benefit holding that corn from now until July? We think the price could go up. So you better be optimistic that the price is going up if you're going to do that, because right now the market is telling you that when it comes July, it's only going to worth $6.83. I'm not going to pay you much more than what I pay you today. So as this crop comes off the field right now, it's not going to gain much value according to what they're expecting today. Could it? Absolutely. Could Putin bomb somebody tomorrow? Absolutely. You never know what's going to happen. They're going to change. But right now, the way the market's looking, it says we want your corn now. We don't want you to store it. We want to have control of it. We just got done hearing about the supply chain issues here in this building. They want their hands on it. They want to get it because they don't have control until they have it. And so the market is saying, give us your corn, give it to us now so we can make sure that we can put it where we need it when we need it. So all the way from December to July, really, you can see there, not much. Maybe a little bit in March, they'll maybe pay you a nickel just to deliver it here after December. Heard the story, somebody was talking about they were disappointed they had hauled all their crop in at harvest last year. Markets went up a little bit and was kind of kicking themselves. Then they drove by 2 semi trucks parked in the ditch, not on purpose, by the way, in February. And And then they thought, you know, it probably was pretty nice to deliver that at harvest time instead of dealing with pulling a couple of semis out of the ditch now here in February. So it has its pros, has its cons as well. But right now, I would argue that the futures market, based on what we think is out there, and I'll argue that I think that projected yield is high. A lot of the tours that go out and do their estimates don't necessarily take into account test weight. There's a lot of areas that were very dry here in August and didn't get the moisture they needed to get really good test weight for that corn. And so I think and it's always hard to estimate test weight. And so I think when it comes time to harvest, I think that yield could be a little bit high. I think we'll probably drop down a little bit, mainly because I'm thinking we're gonna have some light test weight corn in a lot of areas that maybe weren't expecting it. So again, the market, if we're going to have a little bit less than expected, we want it, and that's what they're bidding for. They are bidding for the corn here today based on the futures. Let's talk a little wheat. Again, the last 3 years, I won't go through all of the numbers here on the wheat, but basically, where does our supply come from? And really, what you can look at here on our production numbers, we went from 1.8 billion down to 1.6 last year to this year, up to about 1.7. So we've got decent supply. Our yield is great, 47. I mean, again, this is all wheat. Just to be clear, this is not spring wheat. I'll show a spring wheat slide here in a little bit. So this is all U.S. wheat. So looking at all of the wheat across the country, even though we did have some dry areas of wheat, we'll possibly see this yield get adjusted again a little more. But again, right now the yield at 47.5 with 47 million acres planted. Again, not a record yield, but not a bad yield. Fairly close to trend on that. The beginning stocks are the number that really interests me because, again, I'll show this in a graph as well. But we basically started at 1 billion bushels 2 years ago, and we're down to 660 million starting this year. What is that telling us? We are using more wheat than we are producing. Again, it's good to a point, but it helps make it a little bit tighter. I'll just flip over here. Where's the demand on this? So you can see the top 2.9, 2.5, 2.5 billion bushels. So again, our total supply hasn't really changed this year to last year. Domestic usage doesn't really change a lot from year to year. It's a very inelastic crop. It doesn't change much with what's going on. Our exports hasn't really changed a lot either. So therefore, our total usage is just down a little bit, but yet our total usage is still more than where we were, with now our projected ending stocks dropping from 660 to 610. So we're still projected to use more wheat this year than what we raised, total U.S. wheat. And we're slipping from 40% stocks to use. So what's left in the bin after we use what we need, what's left compared to what we use, we're down to 31%. It wasn't that many years ago. We were over 50%. I think it shows it here. 2017, 55% stocks to use, that blue line. I should explain the bar graphs is the bushels that are measured on the left. But the blue line's what I'm mainly looking at on the right, being a percentage. So how much is left sitting in that bin based on what we used that year? Again, 6 years of numbers that are encouraging to the availability and supply to continue to decrease and not having that much in the bin. So what happens here? I don't have those green lines on here, but just going back all the way to 2000, we go back to 13, 12, 13. They were a little bit below that. Then you go back to those 2 through 2008, where we were tighter than we are today. And we've seen some relatively similar prices, not quite to the extent that we were at $14. $14 wheat this summer wasn't these tight margins. Wasn't the crop you have in the field. It wasn't the harvest. That was the Ukraine-Russia deal. Shutting off the Black Sea. Again, they were talking about supply chain issues. There's no ships that could go in the Black Sea for quite a few weeks, or months. They started again. Obviously, we've seen that. Wheat market reacted. All of a sudden, the Ukrainian and Russian wheat is now available to the world, and we've seen it here. Before that, they were coming to us. Putin, I read this morning, he wants to go back on his deal with allowing the Ukrainian wheat go exports. Must not have a lot of merit since the market's not reacting too excited about it. Actually, wheat is down a little bit, so I don't know if there's more news that came out late morning or not, but not moving too much yet on that news. And that's really I mean, the wheat for the most, there's still some wheat out there, spring wheat out there that's getting harvested, but a lot of the wheat is harvested. We kind of know where we're at. Um, we're on to the next thing. And right now it's the news of what's going on. Wheat is, I say, isn't as exciting as some of the other crops because you're harvesting wheat every month out of the year across the world. There's always wheat being harvested somewhere every month throughout the world. And so it's not quite as seasonal like the corn and the soybeans are. World wheat, again, that was US. World wheat ending stocks, instead of the last 6 years getting tighter, it's the last 4 or 3. We've continued to come down here the last 3 years, down to again about that 33, a little above 33%. So we're a little closer in line with the world ending stocks when it comes to wheat, as far as all wheat. We are not going to have again that 2006, 2007, when we saw that $20 anomaly in the futures market. We're not projecting that again. I just said the $14. We saw a $7 swing in wheat in the last 12 months. Think about that. 7 to 14, and then now back down. $7 swing in the last 12 months. Again, some of it's because of it's tight. Yes, a lot of it is because of what's going on in countries that supply the world with wheat, other than the U.S. Here's our spring wheat. So this is a little more, local flavor. I just have the last 2 years where we've basically been. And again, I just really like to look at that stocks to use number because that tells me how tight are we going to be. Again, for the 21 crop, we come in at about where we thought at 32%. Little tighter on the 2022. And again, where's this coming from? Really, obviously, we cut our supplies when our beginning stocks we started this year. Production was good, obviously much better than last year. With the drought here in North Dakota hit the wheat hard, but still our demand is still holding strong and actually increased from a year ago. And so that increased demand, we were not able to outproduce that. So we continue to pick away at that bin and get that bin a little closer to empty. And that I will argue that is good news because it does make for volatility. And again, I say volatility creates opportunity. And so when we get some of these potential scares, we'll see some upticks in the market and hopefully we can take advantage of that. Here's again, just putting it into a picture there. You can see down here just below 30%, but you can see we've been down there before. This is a little more of a flat line than some of the other crops when it comes to that stocks to use ratio. And as I say, it's a little more inelastic unless we get some somewhat geopolitical news like the Russia war. So what's that mean for the futures? I talk about we've got this crop mostly harvested, some areas still being harvested. What does this mean? We can sell that wheat today for $9.38 less our basis, or plus the basis if you happen to have positive. Most cases, it's usually just a little bit negative. I'm going to pay you 10 cents for this. You guys want 10 cents more to hold something till July? Or do you want to pay your interest off now with that cash you could possibly get? I think there's some smart people in the audience, and they probably got a better calculator in their head than I do. Say 6% interest. What is July? 8 months? That's 6% interest. What is that? 42 cents? 38 cents? Somewhere in there? It's going to cost you, instead of paying off that operating loan, if you have one, cost you 32 cents, but you're going to get a dime more. Unless basis gets better. Another reason to store. Should have mentioned it on corn. Basis does tend to get better later. So you might not pick it up in the market, but you might pick it up in the basis. Or maybe you can lock it in the basis, get maybe 20 cents better, something like that. Then obviously you have to look at it. There's all kinds of tools out there you need to look on your farm to see how can I get the best price for what I have. Those are things to consider. The futures themselves, the larger scale market right now is basically saying maybe store it a month. We'll give you 8 cents. Store it, or not a month, a couple months to get to March, to get 8 cents. Or if you store it all the way to July, you get 10. You're not going to get much more than that. Things to consider, things to look at. Do you have room for your other crops? Soybeans. I'll just go right to the main numbers here. Supply. You can see it continually decreasing our total supply. So what we have left over last year plus today's production or this year's production, each of the last 3 years, we continue to slip from 4.7 billion to 4.3 down on the bottom right. Tighter again. Our supplies continue to get tight. Again, this is what we're producing. Our acres actually went up the last 2 years. From last year to this year, not really much, but from 2020 when 83 million up to 87 million, and stayed right about that 87.5 for this year. And our yield, I would argue, is flat from 51 plus or minus half a bushel, right? We were up a half a bushel last year, down a half a bushel from that this year. Not a bad crop. It's a good crop. We got lots of acres. We got a lot of demand though. Where's this demand coming from? So we got our supply sitting there on top. Domestic usage is, again, I would argue, is fairly flat, and our exports is flat to growing a little bit. Our total usage is actually down a little. And again, like I said, our total supply was continually going down as well, which just keeps dwindling away on that bin. Just keeps pulling more and more bushels out of that bin, getting us down to 200 million bushels left over. By far the tightest of the big three. 200 million bushels left over by the time we're said and done, or 4.5%. Beans are more volatile anyways, but you start getting into even a tighter situation, they're even more volatile, and that's why what happened Monday. As much as, 70 cents up at some point in time on Monday? Because they reduced the yield and the acres and had a little less than first expected. That news hit the market reacted, and it's going to. Now it's taken a few days off. It hasn't been too crazy since then, but it reacted to it. But soybeans tend to like to be a little tighter. Like in that blue line, if you get that 5% is kind of a unwritten rule. You get close to that 5%, that's when we really start getting volatile. We can be above or below that for other reasons, but really at 5% and below is where we really start getting volatile. And what we're projecting today, we're going to be below sub 5% stocks to use. So we're going to have less than 5% in that. How many of you want to drive all the way to the cities and you think you got enough gas, but you're going to be about 4% extra? For those of you who don't like to stop in the cities, I'm going to stop outside the cities and fill up, right? Well, we don't have that opportunity here. The world has that opportunity with Brazil and South America, though. All the U.S. is getting too tight. They're going to start charging too much. We can go to another market, which is that Brazilian market, which unfortunately, because we're offsetting in the time of year, their soybeans come available when we're trying to get to the bottom of our bin. Well, instead of emptying our bins, they can obviously go there instead for potentially a cheaper product. So where's the world? Again, the world is not necessarily as tight as the United States. The United States is more consistent with better quality and able to deliver more frequently than most of the rest of the world. However, we're so tight where the rest of the world has some excess beans. Are they willing to sacrifice some quality or consistency, knowing that they're going to possibly get that at a cheaper rate somewhere else? It's possible. Again, globally, we have a few more beans left over here in the bin. Where do our beans keep going? The yellow portion of this is the amount of bushels going to exports. So where is our demand growing? The orange is basically crushed and the blue is seed and residual. So those two together is basically our domestic. The yellow on top is what is going outside of the United States. We need the world to buy our soybeans. We learned a couple of years ago, we make the wrong country upset with us and they stop buying our soybeans. China. Look what happened. You can see there 17, 18. Look how big of a dip. And they decided to shut us off for a while and stop buying our beans. We had to go to find outside markets. We did, but not to the extent of what China was originally buying. Phase 1 deal came back into play. They started buying some of our beans, still not necessarily to full capacity, but getting closer. That is our one major market. And up here in North Dakota and northern Minnesota, majority of our soybeans go there. So glad to see alternative uses and markets for our soybeans with these crush plants. The ones that are under construction, the ones just coming online, the ones that are in the talks. We start getting all these crush plants here locally. It gives us another market for our soybeans. We raise, and I don't know if today, but I know for many years, Cass County was the largest producer of soybeans than any other county in the nation as far as number of bushels. It's a very big county, and there's a lot of acres of soybeans, but it was number one across the nation. I don't know if it is today. It used to be for quite a while. We have a lot of soybeans. We raise good soybeans. We can do it here. But when we're really reliant and dependent on just China buying them all the time, it scares me. We've seen that. We've learned from it. We're starting to see these other plants. There's other information, obviously, in the news with the renewable diesel, right? Not biodiesel. A lot of people get confused. Biodiesel and renewable diesel are two different things. Renewable diesel takes it a little bit further, and renewable diesel truly acts like diesel fuel. Unlike biodiesel, it's a little tougher up in this cold climate in the winter months, right? Renewable diesel takes it a step further. That's what they're doing out in Dickinson with that new relationship with the plant out there, or they're shipping it out there, the Marathon plant. So ADM Marathon. Those are the things that we need to look for another market. And I think with some of the government policies and direction that they're definitely pushing that's an area of growth we're going to really see. And I think it's going to be a great opportunity. We just got to get the plants up and running so that we can get through that. And that creates also opportunity of soybean meal used to be the main product why they did the crush. And many economists and projections are the soy meal is going to be a byproduct. They're going to have excess soy meal. Try to find a way to get rid of soy meal. Good news for anybody feeding it for their livestock, right? It's good news because hopefully it makes that soy meal a little bit cheaper as well. And there may be opportunity in that market should we have this excess soy meal out there that people might take advantage of too. So what's the soybean market telling us? What are the futures? We got this crop. We got the information what we think is coming. What is the future going to reward us with? I look at November, our new crop month for soybeans at 455. Redundant question again. For 3 cents, are you going to keep that soybean in the bin till July? This is just what the market's telling you today. Basis could improve. It may be worth it. You need to look at basis. Absolutely, it could be worth it. If you got some inside information in the market, something's going to change between now and then. This doesn't mean it'll be 1458 in July. It's saying right now the market is predicting it's going to be that in July. And that's why they're willing to pay for it that now to have it delivered in July. So again, all three of these markets to me are saying we want your beans. And some of this might be the side effect of the supply chain issue that we have. Everybody concerned, will they get it? And so that could be playing part of this as well as other things and other factors in the market. But right now, all three of these futures markets are saying with the crop you are harvesting today, we want it. And we want to control it. We want to get it locked in so we can have it. The rail issue this morning that got resolved, thank goodness. Could have thrown this whole thing. This is just the futures market. This isn't your local cash. That rail, had the rail gone on strike, you would have seen basis levels back to where we don't want to be. And that could have created a huge nightmare for cash receipt on a lot of these commodities as well, outside of what the future's telling you. So that's good news for us this morning as that got resolved. I just show you the drought monitor just to remember how far we've came in a year. If you're a North Dakota farmer, I don't need to tell you it was dry last year. If you're a North Dakota farmer, I don't have to tell you you were dry this year. It just came later. We got more abundance of rain early. I know the drought monitor, a lot of people argue, isn't exactly accurate. It gives us something to kind of gauge it. You can see here just on the east side of North Dakota, southeast, we saw some drought sneaking in here, and this is as of September 6th, I believe it is. Yep. Fun fact, it's hard to see. These are the 4 drought monitors that were published in July. What's unique about this? One state in the lower 48 did not have drought the month of July. One state. Which state was it? North Dakota. So go from the terrible drought we had a year ago to this last July. It was the only state not on the drought monitor map with a drought. I just thought that was kind of a fun fact. Again, I know we were somewhat dry in July. The rains kind of shut off here in June. And we ended up catching up with some of that drought, but it's just kind of an interesting when it comes to that. Briefly, I'm going to touch base on a couple other topics before we close her up here. Interest rates and inflation. So this is always kind of interesting to watch. The little shaded areas on these charts is where we've had recessions. It goes all the way back to 1955, I think it says. The red line is the Fed funds rate. The blue line was what we call inflation. And so going all the way back, people always ask me, they always hear about it. We're in credit, obviously, ag country, loans money to farmers. What about the 80s? Is this the 80s again? Are we in the 80s? High inflation. Interest rates are going up. Russia's mad at us. You know, is this the 80s all over again? There's a lot of symptoms similar to what we have in the 80s. A lot of symptoms. I'll tell you a little bit why I think that it's not the same, but we do definitely have some symptoms of a cold like we maybe would have had then. There are symptoms of what's going on in the 80s. Our interest rate on the bottom right, the red, we just started to go up. That's one that I'd argue is a little bit different. We hear high interest rates, but relative, we're not high. I came into lending in 2005 when I joined Ag Country, and I was fighting to get below 9% interest rate. We were doing prepayment penalties to get intermediate debt below 10%. Most people don't want a prepayment penalty on their interest, right? Or on their loan. But that's what we were doing. I remember we were doing some short 3 and 5 year lockouts to try to get below 10%. I was not a loan officer in the 80s. I was very little. Very little. I know it's hard to believe, but I was smaller than this. But I can remember the mid to late 80s, especially 88, when my dad's soybeans were that tall. I remember that. I remember him having to go talk to the banker and be all friendly because he can't pay his loan back. And that was a very high interest rate. I remember that. So we're not nearly as far as where we were then. Inflation isn't nearly as high as it was back in the 70s and 80s yet. We hopefully are going to get a cap on that. We hopefully have control. We'll have to wait and see what happens. They're already talking another interest hike probably shortly, unless I missed it and they already did it, but then another one probably in November. So we're going to see probably a couple interest rate hikes to try to curb that a little bit. Interest is one of the things that also leads to increasing costs. I know we had some of our suppliers up here talking fertilizer, chemical, things like that too. I'm just going to show you briefly. This is a tool that we have. This is actually a crop insurance. It's a government program that's out there available with your current crop insurance agent. That you can actually lock in where the input prices are today. We just finished those prices. So that was this morning. Again, not the price you're going to pay specifically. This is the national price, kind of like the futures on the corn and soybeans. You know, down in New Orleans, basically they call it NOLA, what urea and DAP are. This is 2022, and I just give this to kind of show a snapshot of what happened. A year ago, we could have been talking about this product and saying, are you interested in the projected column? So kind of that middle column there says projected. Is where it averaged August 15th through September 14th of 2021 for the 22 crop year. That was our averages. On the harvest price column, the boxes I have in red, those were prices that averaged in April. So I'm planning a year ago in September. What am I going to plant? What is my possible margin? Well, here's my projected expenses for the cash. But let's look at the national level. Nationally, here's kind of where the prices are at, generally speaking. My revenue, 606, is the price on corn. That was the average of the futures market for December 2022 at that time. So I can look at my revenue, I can look at my expenses and say, okay, here's on average my margin is X using national markets. Now I can insure that if I wish. It costs premium. It's not cheap. It costs some money. But I could have done that a year ago. Harvest price now, we come April, I'm gonna get these inputs, I'm gonna pay for them, I'm gonna, have the expense if I didn't lock it in with my local co-op. Now we look at those same markets and what did they do? You can see urea $293 higher in those few months. DAP $321 higher. Again, this is a corn example for Cass County. This is what I got here is corn for Cass. So you've seen that huge increase. Diesel also went from $2 up to $3.87. Interest is actually not done yet because we don't track the interest until October, because if you do have an interest on an operating loan, the idea is you're going to hold that all the way till harvest when you can get some cash. So we'll relook at interest in October. My prediction is it'll be a little higher than today based on what's currently going on. So again, that could possibly still go up. So just using those numbers and using that math, you can kind of go, our expenses really went up last spring and continued throughout the summer. Where's this going to lead? So this is where it leads. Our expected cost a year ago was $360, again, using their numbers. It's not every expense that you possibly have on the farm, so don't think that it is, but it's basically those major inputs. with a group that is subject not to change, and they kind of take into assumption some of the machinery and other costs. They don't have return on labor or family living taxes. That's not part of these numbers, but just using the insurance, the things that they can track. Went from $360 last September. Yep, I'm going to plant corn next May. Although the weather was bad, so it was late May, but I'm going to actually plant it. I'm buying all my supplies. It actually cost me $450. Basically $90 more expensive per acre than it was last September. The good news is the revenue did also go up. So my margin probably went up with it a little bit too, or my margin kind of increased a little bit. But it was a 24.7% change in expenses just on these products alone. I only share that with you to know that there are so many tools out there that a lot of people don't know which all available. This is fairly new. It's been about 4 or 5 years been around. In this area, corn, wheat, and soybeans, not every county has all three crops. So depending where you are, you need to check in your county. It might not have all three crops, but this is a product that's out there to help you protect your margin. We've come a long ways in risk mitigation. I just threw up 2023 right now. Again, we just finished this in 2023. So you can see the urea, DAP, potash, diesel, and interest rates where we're starting for a margin. And that's the last 30 days average. The harvest price on the right is just today's current prices. So over the last 30 days, even though the average was 670, we're already up to 692 down in New Orleans for urea. Supply chain issues, that's going to go up or down. I have no idea. Like any other market, who knows what's going to happen? But at least I could know what I know and possibly protect that if I wish. And I wanted to protect that I could. So here's just a consolidation. So 427, 360 a year ago if I want to plant in 2022. Now, if I'm looking at 2023, I'm up to 427 is what I'm projected just based on what the market price alone has moved. So you can see here, my urea is going to cost me just urea alone about $98. Current market where it's at, I'm at 431. So we're already cutting some of that margin, just what we've moved in the last 30 days compared to where the average is at. So just some things to consider. I talked about a large toolbox. With that, I'm going to wrap up here real quick. Questions, make sure you ask them here as we're just coming short on time. We have why we're not in the 80s, such a better toolbox and bigger. We understand cash contracts a lot better. We were always scared. I always call it plant and pray. That's what grandpa did. That's what my dad did. We just plant and pray. And in 88, it didn't work out for my dad with 2-inch soybeans. But you plant and pray. We know a cash contract. We can do futures contracts. There's brokers all over the place. We'll see a few more here this afternoon that'll come up here and share their thoughts and ideas. Options, using puts and calls. We have a better understanding. Or if you don't, you can. You have the opportunity to learn. There's people out there willing to help you. I'll be willing to help you if you don't understand or have a question. Hedge to arrives. Many other products at your local elevators to help you hedge. Input prices can be locked. Your fertilizer guy's there. You can lock that in, right? He's in the combine or before you even out in the combine. If you want to buy fertilizer in August, he might have a fall applied, so you get a discount if you do it in fall. Or I call them flash sales or fire sales. Come the end of the year, you got a tax problem? Guess what? I can sell you fertilizer, and it's at a discount, right? They'll do it. So we can lock some of those things in. We didn't do that back in the 80s. We just didn't have that capability or understanding to do it or the tools. Now we do. The revenue insurance is also a big one. That's a risk mitigation. Huge change in this. Where now we can have revenue protection that protects us from a price and a production fluctuation. I'm protected there. It's at a high deductible, 25% deductible if you buy 75% RP policy, but you have it. So you can now market, allows you to market up to 75% of your APH before you even harvest it. And you know if you don't have the crop insurance will pay to get you out of that contract and you'll be made whole. You'll be okay. And now this new margin is kind of the new thing, the new margin insurance. Not only are we doing production and revenue, now let's look at the input costs, ensure that margin in between there as well. With every great thing that gets better, it gets expensive. So it is an expensive policy, but I will encourage you, if you're interested, look at it. It may be right for you to help protect in this very volatile market to capture some opportunity. What do you need to know? I think you just need to know your numbers. Pencil it out. You need to do it early. A lot of people are like, I only got corn and soybeans harvested. You want me to figure out 23? Well, if you want to farm in 23, there's a lot of risk. You want to figure it out now, or you want to be reactive and see what happens next spring? I know farmers don't necessarily like sitting on the table crunching numbers all the time. Call your loan officer. He loves it. That's what he does or she does. They'll crunch the numbers with you. explore your different options, look at your crop insurance plans, what's out there, and just manage your margins. You can do it in the cash market, you can do it with a broker, or you can do it all put together in an insurance policy as well. All of them have a cost. It's which cost are you willing to spend, and how do you want to manage it? All available, very large toolbox for you guys to protect yourself. So nobody's the same, so I can't stand up here and say everybody should buy this, everybody should do this, everybody should market this. Everybody's different. Their risk appetite's different, their balance sheets are different, but you need to manage what you can, manage what you can control, utilize what's available to you, at least explore them and figure it out. And again, be proactive versus reactive. The market doesn't really care what you do per se, so do what you can to take advantage of what that market's providing you. So with that, I think I have time for one question. If we got the first question in the back, the mic will be coming right to you.
Do you have the costs for soybeans?
Not off the top of my head. I can run them. I could get it for you real quick here afterwards if you want to stick around, but they're going to be lower than that because they're not going to use urea. And so it's going to be a little bit different. That's going to be the biggest one as far as cost down. So, but yeah, I'll stick around afterwards and I'll show you real quick what that is. Good question. Any other questions? If not, I thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Red River Farm Network, for allowing us to use their stage here at Big Iron all 3 days. I really appreciate it. Thanks for those joining us online. Appreciate it. Everybody have a great day and a safe harvest coming up. Thanks again.
Farming today doesn't always feel the same way it used to. Then again, some of it feels all the same. Maybe it isn't so much the jobs that changed, but how they get done. Now that's a different story. Efficiencies are critical, which is why you need a lender who will find the right loan structure for a strong financial future. You need a lender to look out for your whole farm operation. Ag Country.